Unimaginable natural forces came to Palestine's rescue. After years of occupation, the Palestinian people finally achieved a remarkable victory. With the help of the legendary figure, Nyi Roro Kidul, the Queen of the South Sea, the invincible Israeli army crumbled in an instant. 5 Israeli generals were killed in a fierce battle led by mystical power and devastating sea waves. However, this is not just about victory. It is the beginning of a long journey to build a peaceful future. Will the peace earned with blood and sacrifice endure? What will happen next in the land long choked by war? Find the answers in this story full of hope and tension. Before this video continues, I sincerely ask all friends for your goodwill to like and subscribe. I pray that you all will always be healthy, have long lives, and be granted smooth fortune. All right, let's start the story. On a quiet night in the South Sea, in the middle of the vast ocean, there was a peace that was rarely disturbed. Waves rolled slowly, touching the shore gently. No one knew that beneath this calm surface lay a great power that maintained the balance of the world. Nyi Roro Kidul, the Queen of the South Sea, sat on her sea throne, looking into the distance, contemplating the destiny that had long awaited her. However, that night was different. The sea, which usually spoke in soft whispers, was now screaming loudly as if announcing something important. Huge waves began to form. The wind blew fiercely, and dark black clouds began to shroud the previously clear sky. Nyi Roro Kidul, with her sixth sense, felt this change very clearly. Something big was about to happen, and this was not just a warning from nature, but a call from the earth itself. In the chilling silence, the sound of the wind echoed, forming sentences that could not be ignored. "Help them, O Queen of the Sea," the voice said. Although the source of the voice was unclear, for Nyi Roro Kidul, it was so familiar. A call from a land that was now full of suffering and blood, Palestine. For centuries, Nyi Roro Kidul had always maintained the balance between the real world and the unseen world. The South Sea was her territory, the place where she controlled everything related to the forces of nature. However, this extraordinary power had never been used to interfere in human affairs, except in extraordinarily urgent circumstances. And this time, the call came from Palestine, a place that was being colonized, destroyed by merciless foreign powers. Nyi Roro Kidul stared at the turbulent sea with determination. "What must I do?" she thought to herself. She knew it was time to get involved. She had been maintaining the balance of nature for long enough, but the human world now needed her help. Although she had long lived in the solitude of the silent sea, she now knew that the call to intervene had arrived. With a single-hand gesture, she summoned the natural forces around the sea. The still water suddenly moved and created intricate formations, as if showing her the way. In an instant, Nyi Roro Kidul stood wearing a green kabaya that radiated a soft light. With a determined smile, she raised her hand into the air, calling the wind that carried news from the land. The wind swirled strongly, carrying her towards Palestine. Nyi Roro Kidul knew this was not just a physical journey. Within her was a power greater than anything humans could see, a power tied to nature and the universe. As she flew, the sky seemed overcast. Lightning flashed far in the distance, indicating a journey full of challenges. As she crossed the clouds, a vision appeared before her. She saw an image of a barren land with blood flowing in every corner. There were mothers weeping, children lying weak, and troops fighting with spirits that were almost extinguished. The image moved her heart. The courage they showed, despite their shortcomings and fear, made her even more certain that she had to help. Upon arriving in Palestine, Nyi Roro Kidul landed on the ground that was now filled with wounds. Her first step touching the ground made the earth shake, as if nature was welcoming her arrival. The vast South Sea now bore witness to the greatness of the power that came from the unseen world to aid the struggle of humankind. In front of her, Nyi Roro Kidul saw the Israeli forces on the front line, ready to continue their attack. No one knew who would win this battle, but one thing was clear: Palestine needed help, and Nyi Roro Kidul would not let this land sink into ruin without a fight. There, among the ruins, Nyi Roro Kidul met a Palestinian leader who stood with a face full of hope despite his weary body. "We have fought for so long, but no one has come to help," the leader said in a voice that was almost inaudible. "We need strength, not just words." Nyi Roro Kidul looked at him gently and nodded. "That strength comes from within, and I will help you find that strength. Nothing can defeat determination and unity. Together we will change your destiny." With those words, Nyi Roro Kidul began to gather forces from nature. She called the wind to swirl, bringing the sea troops loyal to her. The calm seawater suddenly turned fierce, creating sea creatures ready to battle. Together with the Palestinian forces, they marched towards the battlefield, waiting for the right moment to destroy the enemy forces that had oppressed them for too long. However, Nyi Roro Kidul knew that even with the power of nature on their side, victory would not come easily. The Israeli forces had advanced technology, but Nyi Roro Kidul believed that courage and unity could overcome everything. Within her, she carried an unwavering hope for Palestine. The sea that calmed, the wind that blew hard, everything was ready for war. Nyi Roro Kidul raised her hand, signaling the Palestinian forces to advance. "Today we begin to fight back. With our strength, we will change the world." With that began the great journey that would change the destiny of the Palestinian people forever. The dark sky, the turbulent earth, all united in one goal, to free Palestine from the suffering that had been endured for too long. Nyi Roro Kidul had intervened, and a new struggle began. Since Nyi Roro Kidul's arrival in Palestine, everything changed. The South Sea, which had only been known as a distant and untouched place, was now present in the form of a great force that gave new hope to the Palestinian people. As soon as Nyi Roro Kidul's feet touched the land gripped by war and sadness, it felt like a signal that the world would not let them struggle alone. Nyi Roro Kidul stood tall in the middle of the quiet desert. Around her, the exhausted Palestinian forces looked on with eyes full of hope. Although they had fought for a long time, their spirit was almost fading, crushed by the non-stop attacks. However, the arrival of the Queen of the South Sea signaled that there was a greater power out there, ready to help. "Don't worry, you are not alone," said Nyi Roro Kidul in a soft but powerful voice. "I have come to help you. Together we will fight this tyranny. Your strength is in your hearts, and I will help you find the path to victory." The Palestinian forces, who had looked weary, now began to feel a new spirit. They saw Nyi Roro Kidul with the mystical aura surrounding her and knew that she was no ordinary figure. The Queen of the South Sea possessed a power far beyond what they could imagine. With her hand raised, Nyi Roro Kidul began to call a strong wind. The wind that came not only brought cool air, but also carried an extraordinary natural power. The Palestinian forces could feel that power, as if the energy was seeping into their bodies, giving them the courage to go further. "Now you will see the true power of nature," said Nyi Roro Kidul, looking towards the Israeli forces who were still far away, not far from their position. With one movement, Nyi Roro Kidul called the sea to come. The calm water in the distance began to move, rolling in huge waves that approached. However, this was not just an ordinary wave. These were waves that carried large creatures, natural forces ready to aid their struggle. The Palestinian forces were stunned to see the sea creatures emerging from the waves, giant fish, large turtles, and even mystical creatures that radiated a green light from their bodies. All these creatures followed Nyi Roro Kidul's commands with extraordinary discipline, ready to fight on the battlefield. Seeing the sight, the hearts of the Palestinian forces, which were initially fearful, were now filled with hope. They knew that this was not just a fight to reclaim land, but also to defend their dignity and rights that had been long stolen. The Queen of the South Sea had given them endless power, a natural force that could not be matched by anything. Nyi Roro Kidul, with all her natural forces, marched towards the front line of the battle. The Israeli forces, who were previously very confident with their technology and strength, now began to feel fear. They did not know where the great power that was threatening them came from, but they felt an aura that was so strong and terrifying. In the midst of the Israeli forces, a sense of anxiety began to spread. A senior commander standing in the front row looked towards the sea, watching the increasingly large waves and something unusual. "What is happening? What are they bringing?" he muttered, trying to understand the increasingly confusing situation. However, the Israeli forces did not have time to ask further questions. Nyi Roro Kidul ordered the natural forces to advance. In an instant, giant fish lunged forward with their large bodies, destroying the fragile Israeli military barricades. Huge waves came crashing, causing the Israeli forces to scatter and lose control of their positions. The deep attack from the natural forces and the Palestinian forces, led by Nyi Roro Kidul, made the Israeli forces stagger. Those who were still standing felt fear, a feeling they had never felt before. The advanced technology and modern weapons that had been their mainstay were now powerless against the waves of nature and the mystical power brought by the Queen of the South Sea. Nyi Roro Kidul stopped there. With the strong wind blowing, she summoned a storm that brought sand and dust, blurring the view of the Israeli forces. "This is the true power," said Nyi Roro Kidul with full wisdom. "A power that cannot be subdued by weapons or technology. The power of nature that has existed since the beginning of the world." In the chaos that ensued, the 5 Israeli generals who were on the front line, who had previously controlled the forces with an iron fist, finally fell one by one. No bullets or bombs could fight the energy flowing from the sea and the wind. With one massive attack, the 5 generals were killed. Their bodies sank into the sand, struck by the power of nature's wave. The Israeli forces began to retreat, losing morale after losing their leaders. Without clear command, their forces scattered. Meanwhile, the Palestinian forces, now filled with new strength, advanced further. They knew that their opportunity to reclaim their land was getting bigger. However, even though the battle was intensifying, Nyi Roro Kidul remained calm. She knew that this war was not just about physical victory, but also about giving hope to people who were marginalized and forgotten. "We are not just fighting for land, but for dignity," she said to herself. With a new spirit, the Palestinian forces continued to advance, realizing that they were no longer fighting alone. They had a greater power, the power of nature accompanied by Nyi Roro Kidul, the Queen of the South Sea, who would continue to stand by their side, leading them to victory. The war intensified. On one side, the Israeli forces, trained with advanced technology and heavy weaponry, now felt threatened by a power they did not understand. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Palestinian forces, who were previously helpless, now rose with extraordinary strength given by Nyi Roro Kidul. The Queen of the South Sea, known for her mystical power, brought reinforcements from nature that could not be resisted by ordinary human forces. The sky above the battlefield turned dark. Lightning flashed and the wind blew hard, increasing the already gripping tension. Nyi Roro Kidul stood tall on the front line with her radiant body emanating an undeniable aura. Around her, the Palestinian forces were now enveloped in a new spirit thanks to the natural power they received. They knew this was no longer just a physical battle, but a war between human power and the nature that flowed in Nyi Roro Kidul's body. While the Israeli forces became more confused, the Palestinian forces, led by Nyi Roro Kidul, became more organized. The sea forces summoned by Nyi Roro Kidul came in a very orderly formation. Giant fish and sea creatures with extraordinary strength sped quickly over the rolling sea surface. They came with very high speed, striking the Israeli forces along the coast, destroying everything in their path. On land, the Palestinian forces, who were previously afraid and doubtful, now became more courageous forces. They carried traditional weapons and some weapons they obtained from international aid. But more importantly, they carried an unwavering spirit. Together with Nyi Roro Kidul, they moved towards the center of the Israeli forces' command, which was located on the outskirts of the city. The first attack began with a quick and unexpected movement. Nyi Roro Kidul raised her hand, and in an instant, a very large sandstorm appeared, covering the entire battlefield. This storm blurred the view of the Israeli forces, who were unprepared for an attack from an unexpected direction. They tried to fire their weapons, but the strong wind caused their bullets to miss. They could not see what was happening, only hear the increasingly loud roar of the wind. Then a large wave came from the sea. The sea forces led by Nyi Roro Kidul attacked with full force. Giant fish tore through the Israeli defense lines. Meanwhile, large sea creatures with sharp claws and teeth destroyed their military vehicles. With every wave crash, the Israeli warships parked along the coast began to sink one by one, as if sucked in by the mighty power of the sea. The Israeli forces on land were surprised and lost control. Some of their forces began to retreat, but most remained, trying to break through the increasingly terrifying storm and waves. However, their every step was stopped by an unseen force. Nyi Roro Kidul, who was in the middle of the battlefield, called on larger sea creatures to add strength. All the sea forces led by the Queen of the South Sea attacked with incredible speed and power, destroying the Israeli forces' defenses from all sides. "This is a power greater than you can imagine," Nyi Roro Kidul shouted to the Israeli forces who were trying to hold on. With an echoing voice, she called more sea creatures to destroy everything in front of them. Meanwhile, the Palestinian forces on land continued to advance. They no longer felt the fear as before. Seeing how formidable the attack launched by Nyi Roro Kidul was, they felt confident. They felt a strong spirit flowing through their bodies, as if they were given strength by nature itself. They advanced together with full courage, destroying every defense in their way. On the other side, the Israeli forces began to feel pressured. They had never faced a force like this before. They tried to fight back in every way they could, but their sophisticated weapons were unable to resist the attack from nature. Large waves continued to come, destroying their barricades. In addition, the sea creatures controlled by Nyi Roro Kidul continued to pound them relentlessly. In the midst of the chaos, the Israeli generals who were still holding on tried to organize the forces. But they knew the power they were facing this time was much greater than they could fight. Not long after, a very dramatic event occurred. In the middle of the battlefield, the 5 Israeli generals leading the forces on the front line were killed in a short time. They fell one by one, not because of bullets or bombs, but because of the irresistible power of nature. Bullets or weapons did not kill them, but because of the power of nature unleashed by Nyi Roro Kidul, their bodies were destroyed by the sudden ocean waves struck by an unavoidable force. One of the strongest among them tried to resist by all means, but eventually drowned in the ferocious sea waves. With the fall of these 5 generals, the Israeli forces began to lose direction. Their leadership was shattered, and their morale collapsed with the death of their commanders. Many of the Israeli troops began to flee, trying to save themselves from the insurmountable force of nature. Meanwhile, the Palestinian forces, led by Nyi Roro Kidul, achieved a major victory. They continued to advance, destroying the remnants of the Israeli defense. The naval forces, led by Nyi Roro Kidul, were unforgiving. Every attack drove the Israeli forces further into a corner and ultimately forced them to retreat. However, even though victory was imminent, Nyi Roro Kidul paused there. She knew the war was not over yet. Although the Israeli forces were starting to retreat, another threat still lurked behind. Yet, one thing was clear. The power of nature brought forth by Nyi Roro Kidul had changed the course of this war, giving new hope to the long-oppressed Palestinian people. The war on Palestinian soil intensified. The Israeli forces, whom no one had ever imagined could be cornered, were now trapped by a power far beyond their comprehension. The troops, consisting of thousands of trained soldiers with modern weaponry and advanced technology, were now gripped by fear, not only of the newly energized Palestinian forces, but also of the extraordinary power brought by Nyi Roro Kidul, the Queen of the Southern Sea. In every battle that took place, the trace of the natural power commanded by Nyi Roro Kidul became clearer. The surging sea, the raging winds, and the storms that destroyed Israel's defenses all bore witness to the great change unfolding on the battlefield. However, the climax was when the 5 most powerful Israeli generals fell in one massive attack led by Nyi Roro Kidul. They perished in a very dramatic way, as if nature itself was demanding accountability for the suffering they had inflicted. That day, the battle unfolded with incredible speed. The Israeli forces on the front lines tried to retaliate with machine gun fire, tanks, and rockets. However, the uncontrollable forces of nature gave them almost no chance. Huge waves coming from the sea slammed into their defenses. Giant tanks, normally formidable, were swept away effortlessly by the relentless waves. A fleet of warships, previously considered unshakable, sank quickly as if sucked down by a force greater than they could handle. Nyi Roro Kidul, standing in the middle of the battlefield with a look of utter calm, knew that this battle had to end soon. With a single gesture of her hand, she directed all the natural power around her. The calm sea instantly turned ferocious. The naval forces, previously scattered, now moved in a highly ordered formation, attacking the Israeli troops from all sides. Suddenly, a highly focused attack struck the main headquarters of the Israeli forces. There, the 5 Israeli generals leading the forces on the front line were inside a command center protected by sophisticated equipment. However, that protection could not stand against the natural power coming from the sea. Nyi Roro Kidul summoned a giant wave that appeared rapidly. This wave was not just an ordinary breaker, but a force of nature specifically created to destroy. Amidst the chaos, the 5 generals, known for their toughness, did not have time to realize what was happening. They could not evade the devastating force of nature. One general, known as a very harsh leader and famous for his strategic intelligence, tried to command his troops to hold their ground. However, he did not know that the dark sky was already witnessing the fate they could not avoid. With a movement of Nyi Roro Kidul's hand, a massive wave struck their command center. In an instant, the general fell. His body was dragged by the incredibly strong sea current, unable to hold on. Soon after, the 4 other generals met the same fate. They tried to resist by all means, but their bodies, so well trained to face human enemies, could not withstand the natural power summoned by Nyi Roro Kidul. With one huge wave and an unexpected terror, the 5 Israeli generals leading their best forces were killed. The loss of these 5 generals shattered the morale of the Israeli forces. Without clear leaders, without definite direction, the Israeli troops began to fragment. Fear and confusion started to sweep through their ranks. The troops who were previously full of confidence now felt as if there was no hope left. They retreated slowly, trying to save themselves. But the attacks from the Palestinian forces, led by Nyi Roro Kidul, became increasingly intense. On the other side, the Palestinian forces who witnessed the fall of the 5 generals felt as if the world had changed. The victory they had dreamed of for so long now seemed closer than ever. They advanced with great spirit, following Nyi Roro Kidul, who continued to direct the natural forces to destroy the remnants of Israel's defense. Every step of the Palestinian forces was a step towards freedom. They knew they were no longer fighting empty-handed, but with the unstoppable power of nature. Nyi Roro Kidul watched the chaos on the battlefield with a smile of wisdom. "This is the right moment," she whispered to herself. "Nothing can defeat the true power of nature." In the increasingly silent battlefield, the sound of the retreating Israeli forces grew distant. The Palestinian troops continued to advance, bringing new hope to their people. However, even though victory was imminent, Nyi Roro Kidul knew that this was only one step in the long journey they had to take. "This war is not over," she thought to herself. "However, today we have changed history." With a determined step, Nyi Roro Kidul moved forward, ensuring that the Palestinian forces would continue to fight. The remaining Israeli forces, having lost their leaders and their spirit, now had to face the bitter reality that they could no longer hold out. The courage of the Palestinian people, fortified by the natural power led by the Queen of the Southern Sea, became a symbol of an unwavering struggle. This war, though far from over, had shown that the true power of nature could defeat even the most advanced forces, and for Nyi Roro Kidul, the journey to liberate Palestine had just begun. The Israeli forces retreated quickly, abandoning the battlefield that was previously filled with fierce fighting. Without their 5 generals and with their spirit broken, the remaining troops no longer had a clear direction. They were only fighting for survival, having lost their focus and fighting spirit. On the other side, the Palestinian forces, who were previously full of fear, now felt a pride and strength they had never imagined. Nyi Roro Kidul, with her extraordinary natural power, had given them unwavering hope and spirit. Nyi Roro Kidul stood, tall in front of the Palestinian forces, gazing at the distant horizon. The calm sea behind her, the gentle wind blowing, all reflected the peace that had just been created. But in her heart, she knew that the war was not entirely over. Israel might have lost control, but the threat from foreign powers and greater enemies still loomed. Nyi Roro Kidul could not forget her main goal: to free the land of Palestine from the suffering they had endured for too long. On the battlefield, which was still not completely silent, the Palestinian forces, led by Nyi Roro Kidul, continued their journey, demanding retribution for all the suffering they had experienced. Every step they took added to their strength. Every attack further destroyed the powerless remnants of Israel's defense. With every echo of their victory shouts, the Palestinian forces became more certain that they would reclaim their land. However, even though victory was getting closer, Nyi Roro Kidul did not let her troops become complacent. She knew that even though the Israeli forces were now retreating, they still had vast reserves, and the possibility of a counterattack was still very high. "We must be prepared," Nyi Roro Kidul said in a soft but authoritative voice. "This victory is the beginning of a long journey. We will protect this land from every threat that comes."